Welcome everyone. Good evening. It's a pleasure to welcome you here on behalf of the Atlantic Association and the youth chapter of the Atlantic Association, YATA, Young Atlanticists in short. It's a pleasure to welcome you here in particular because this is one of the first times again that we are meeting live. So not from behind the screen, but just face to face. And we are able to have a hopefully fruitful and joyful discussion. It's my pleasure to welcome our three speakers of tonight. One from America, all the way from Ohio, Matt Meyer, Bianca Pander, and Eelco Bosch van Rosenthal from the Netherlands. And they hopefully will inspire you for a discussion on the American midterms elections. What's all about it. I'll keep it short because you've been able to read, I guess, all the CVs that has been forwarded to you. I'll start introducing Matt Meyer very briefly. He's from Ohio, self-employed. He has his own think tank, Opportunity Ohio. He has written extensively on American elections results and what's all behind it. And he is extremely knowledgeable, from my experience, on the ins and outs of the elections, the electorate, and what drives people to vote for the Republicans or Democrats or any other parties that are participating in the elections. He has arrived this morning very early with 2 hours delay. Still, he's not falling asleep, as I can see from my point of view. So I'm sure he's gonna give you a fantastic introduction to the elections. His particular view, I should stress, not the Atlantic Association's view. It's the whole idea that we offer a platform. This is an early warning. This is a platform for discussion. And it will be followed by remarks by Bianca Pander of BKB, which stands for the initials of the founding fathers, so to speak. But she's part of that founding fathers club as well, as being one of the business directors of that company. Very welcome too. And Eelco Bosch van Rosenthal, who hardly needs an introduction for most of you here, journalist with Dutch public television. And he will be moderating the discussion afterward. But first I would like to invite Matt Meyer for his introductory remarks. And then Eelco Bosch will take it over. Matt, and may I ask you to give an applause for Matt Meyer.
Thank you very much for coming out. I know it's a far nicer environment outside than it is in here, but thank you for coming nonetheless. Bram, thank you once again for having me. I don't know how many years we've been doing this, 6 or 7. This is the first since the pandemic ended, so it's always good to come back here. And usually I'm here in the early spring or the late fall, and so I never get this kind of weather. So I've had a great day today. I think I'm going on about an hour and a half of sleep right now on the plane, which, as you can imagine, wasn't great sleep. And then Bram marched me about 10.5 miles so far today. If I fall asleep up here, blame Bram. So let's talk about the upcoming midterm elections in the U.S. So historically speaking, those elections tend to break against the party that controls the White House. So in this situation, that'd be Joe Biden and the Democrats. Just year after year, that's the trend. There's been 2 times in the last 40 years that's not been the case. The latest internal polling from the Democrat Congressional Committee, which the DCCC, that's the committee that runs all the House races for the Democrats, their internal polling has Republicans on a generic ballot up 47 to 39, which that translates into a fairly substantial individual House race after race. Typically, even when Democrats are ahead by 1 or 2 points, Republicans still take control of the House in that situation. So right now, with some 5 months till the election, there's a 8-point Republican advantage by the DCCC's own internal polling. So that gives you a sense of where things stand. Events are breaking on a weekly basis against Joe Biden and the Democrats. They're in total control in DC right now, right? They've got the House by about 6 votes, depending on if there's a retirement or not. And then they control the Senate by Vice President Kamala Harris's tie-breaking vote. It's 50-50. And then, of course, they control the White House. So having that control, the environment in the U.S. right now is not good for them. And let me cover a couple things. One, inflation is hitting record highs in the U.S., which is impacting Main Street America. Bram and I talked about this earlier. Most Europeans, has everyone been here been to America? How about who has not been? Okay, just a couple. Those of you who have been, most of you, except for reporters, go to New York or Boston, maybe pop down to Miami, maybe hit Chicago, and then San Francisco and LA. And they don't really get to what's called flyover country, which is where I'm from, Ohio. My other 2 speakers tonight have both been to Ohio. They can tell you there's not much to see, but it's traditionally been a battleground state, so that's why a lot of reporters end up in Ohio. But Main Street America is that part of the country that when I refer to it, it's that, outside of the East and West Coast and your big urban centers, that's kind of the Main Street, where the suburbs and the rural areas. And they're getting crushed at the gas pumps, at the grocery store, and any items driven by interest rates. So credit cards, mortgage payments, car payments, all those things they're feeling, and they don't have the flexibility that the kind of upper class in America have. So when gas prices are, $90 to fill up your car, that hurts them at their kitchen table. When going to the grocery store is $30 more this week than last week or a couple weeks ago, they feel that at their kitchen table, and they got to cut things out elsewhere. When they deal with moving interest rates on things they need to for their house, car, or whatever, they're the ones that feel it the most. So that's been an issue for them. Biden's approval rating is hitting historic lows in the U.S. And does not help. Kamala Harris's approval ratings are even lower than his. So as a ticket, they're not in good shape. The Hispanic vote in America is trending towards Republicans. And I know that tends to be a shock for Europeans. But in the 2020 election, Donald Trump got more minority votes than any Republican president in modern history. The driver of the Hispanic vote I think it makes sense if you think about it. In America, the Hispanic community is kind of the most recent immigrant community. So the legal Hispanic Americans that are there tend to be in your kind of service economy jobs, right? Cleaning hotels, cleaning office buildings, agriculture, landscaping. So it's those really entry level, minimum wage or slightly higher paying jobs. They are the ones most threatened by kind of that illegal migrant worker that comes across the southern border. So for them, when they see kind of a keep the border shut down under the Republicans versus open the border up under the Democrats, they see that as kind of hitting their pocketbook. So I think that's partially why you're seeing that Hispanic vote increasingly moving towards the Republican Party in the last few years. Even the black vote is starting to shift towards the Republicans, which for most of the last 50 years, the black vote has been about a 92% reliable vote for the Democratic Party. So it doesn't matter who the candidates are, that's been the typical vote. For within that community, what you're seeing is black men are starting to vote more Republican, and black women are remaining in that 92% range. And you have to keep in mind, we're not talking about a huge shift in the black community, but if Republican candidates can get from 92 to 8 losses, they can shift that to 2080. that number becomes a very difficult number for a Democrat to overcome with other votes from other communities. And so any shift can kind of make it really difficult for a Democrat to win a statewide campaign, if that makes sense. The top issues right now on voter minds are favoring Republicans, and virtually every single one, Republicans are favored over Democrats. So the economy, inflation, border security, those types of things. And then Biden's age is becoming an issue increasingly, whether it's comments he makes that his staff walk back, or it's comments he makes that don't make sense. He just increasingly seems old, and he is, right? He is an old guy. And that's becoming an issue. So when you get to kind of some specifics, I think last week, America in all 50 states, the average gas price was over $4, which I know you guys are like, so what? Ours would be 8.5 comparable. But that's expensive for Americans, right? We're used to $2.30, $2.70. So when you pop it up to over $4, and they're expecting that to go above $6 by August. So if that keeps going up higher and higher, again, that Main Street American vote is going to get angrier and angrier at who's in control, right? The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is where we keep a bunch of extra reserves out in Oklahoma, Stillwell, Oklahoma. Joe Biden tapped that to try to bring the price of gas down. It worked for about 3 days, and price went back up. And the problem with that is that's hit the lowest level of reserve we've ever had it. And if you think just basic economics, for us to put the reserves back up and build it back up, we're going to be paying today's prices, not when we bought it, which was cheaper. So it's going to cost a ton of money for us to get the reserve back up. Another issue is, and I don't know if it's an issue here, it's a huge issue in America, is the increasing fentanyl overdoses that are occurring. Last year, we had 107,000 overdose deaths in America. 80,000 plus of those were fentanyl related. Quick background on that. What you saw was when China entered the World Trade Organization in 2001, over the next essentially decade, there was a massive hollowing out of the manufacturing Rust Belt where I live, Ohio, Indiana, Pennsylvania, Michigan. There are cases in Ohio where they literally took bolt by bolt a part of a plant, shipped it over to China and rebuilt it. And those communities were left with gaping wounds. About a decade ago, that wound increasingly started being filled by opioids. So these folks started taking more and more opioid addiction to kind of cut the pain. And then in the last 6-7 years, with the rise of fentanyl being put into the opioids, you're now seeing all those overdoses pop higher and higher every year. That fentanyl is coming across our southern border by the Mexican cartels, being fed from labs in China. So all that's kind of creating huge problems in the U.S., places especially where I live, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, huge numbers of deaths. And then COVID, Biden entered office with a huge advantage on COVID. People blame Trump for what had happened. He inherited a vaccine. He inherited a year's worth of knowledge about how to deal with it. And it's not gone well. There have now been more deaths under Biden than there were under Trump. And even at the average monthly death rate is higher under Biden than it was under Trump. And Trump had no vaccine for all but about the last month of his presidency. And we were fighting this thing for the first time. So that's been a fascinating change. If you guys get the handout, the one with the charts, if you look, just put this together because it's interesting to kind of look at, right? If you look at the very first two, those are from, I don't know if anybody ever looks at what's called realclearpolitics.com. It's a great website that has, every day it has kind of a smattering of op-eds from both sides of the political spectrum. So you can read those, but they also have a great polling where they compile all the various polling in races all across the country. And then things like this. So this is from this as of, I think, 2 days ago is when I sent it to Bram. But as you can see, Trump's approval rating is slightly lower than Trump's. His disapproval rating is slightly better than Trump's. So it's kind of a wash. And if you kind of look at those, the thing that's most interesting about these two charts is, you can see Trump really never had much of a positive rating ever, right? From the moment he entered the presidency to today, he's largely been mostly negative. Whereas Biden had a great start from the beginning, and this is where it all went downhill. And so you can see this is going to increasingly be a problem come midterm elections if that number doesn't close a bit. If you look at the next kind of chart, which are the one where my chicken scratch, my kids say I should have been a doctor. One of the things you're hearing in the US from the administration is, right, the gas is due to Putin. This is Putin's problem. Putin's causing this. So if you look where that red line is, that is essentially the election happened. And you can notice within just days of the election where Biden won, the gas price starts going up. And then here is kind of where Putin comes into play, which is the last beat. The reason it went up is because Joe Biden made it very clear during the campaign that he was going to reconstitute the war on carbon that Barack Obama had done. So we're going to go after fracking. We're going to shut down pipelines. We're going to shut down all this kind of federal leases on drilling. That scared the bejesus out of the industry. And obviously you can see, and one of the biggest problems what we're seeing in the US is even now where there's some interest in trying to get some of that going back, they've done such a good job scaring Wall Street on pipelines and fracking that the energy companies actually can't even get capital to invest in new stuff. So they can't even get the funding. So not much is going on. The other chart is kind of in a way related. I just wanted to kind of show how, this is where we had reached after, under Obama and then Trump, you had that great fracking boom in America, hydraulic fracturing, which allowed us to open up a lot of wells that then created that energy independence for the first time ever. And we've obviously now, we don't have that anymore. That next page, the picture, have you guys seen this sticker? Have you heard about these stickers? So this is my Twitter feed from October of well before Putin's, Russia stuff. These stickers started popping up on gas station pumps all over the country where a picture of Biden saying, I did that. And so you'd pull up, somebody had put a sticker on there to show that, he caused you all to spend all that money. It's just kind of one of those funny things that I don't know who came up with it, but it spread rapidly. And so gas stations started putting signs up, please don't put stickers on the pump, and all this kind of funny stuff. The next one you can see is the fentanyl overdose, that huge chunk that you can see goes higher and higher every year. The next set, this is the stock market. So in the last month, this is where the wealth class in America started feeling a little bit more pain, right? We've had some stock market issues. And so that's 401ks, that's pension plans, that's brokerage accounts. So this is where folks are starting to feel it. And you could see from the beginning of Trump's presidency to the end, he had about a 144% increase in stock price, the stock market, the S&P 500. Even after COVID, it did a huge drop. He still recovered well into it. And so far, Biden's at about a 10.8% gain. But you can see where that number has been coming down. So depending on what happens over the next 5 months, that could, again, further hurt his chances. That next slide, this is, some of you have heard, the Supreme Court is going to make a decision that's likely to overturn the abortion case of Roe v. Wade. The opinion slipped out, which is unprecedented. Just wanted to show you from a polling standpoint, most Americans are kind of where most of Europe is, which is at about 20 weeks, you can't do anything thereafter unless it's health of the mother kind of thing. Before that, there will be different regulations, but 65 and 80% of Americans say nothing in the second or third trimester. First trimester is open game. So that likely means that issue's not going to drive turnout in the way some folks would hope on either side. It's probably going to just be a stalemate. If you go to the next page, have you guys heard of the Let's Go Brandon? Who hasn't heard of that? Okay, so there was what NASCAR is, the racing stuff in America? There was a guy who won a race and his name was Brandon. Have you guys heard this? You really haven't heard this? Okay. So this guy wins a race and he was being interviewed by a news reporter and she said, something, and somebody yelled out, F you, Joe Biden. And she said, oh, somebody said, let's go Brandon, instead of F you, Joe Biden. And that became like a massive meme across America, where people then started having flags, let's go Brandon. People would yell it all the time. And this is Apple downloads. I just thought I'd give you a screenshot. When I did this, there were 4 versions of rap songs that are titled Let's Go Brandon. I've got two of them on my phone, and they're kind of funny to listen to because it's just all about this "Let's go Brandon" thing. So you might hear Americans say "Let's go Brandon," and that really is code for "F you, Joe Biden." It just caught on after this goofy reporter at a NASCAR race, and it hasn't stopped. That next chart, again, that's the COVID numbers I had talked about. You can just see kind of where it all cuts off. And then the final picture, this is as of 2 days ago, the UK betting sites on the presidency. Right now, Trump is a heavy favorite to win the White House back in 2024, should he run. Joe Biden's next, and then the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, is then after that, and then you can see Kamala Harris is down at 6%. Now, that just kind of shows you where things are, kind of the landscape is. In terms of redistricting in America is every 10 years our census does a population count. Based upon the population count, every state is apportioned the number of congressional seats in the U.S. House of Representatives based upon population. That was supposed to be a big win for Democrats because the former Attorney General under Barack Obama, Eric Holder, has an entire litigation group. They have tons of lawyers, and their job is to try to essentially, they call it sue or settle, or try to get redistricting drawn by in a way that's most favorable to the Democrats. And Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey, he started a competing group to fight on the other side of it. The initial thought was that the Democrats were going to win big on redistricting just because some of the states, the way it all filled out. It actually ended up being that at best case, it's going to be a wash, or it might benefit the Republicans because, especially in New York, a judge threw out the map that the Democrats had drawn and put a judge-drawn map that is far more favorable to Republicans. And so it looks like it's going to be, again, best case a wash, most likely a slight win for the Republicans. What that means is, as of right now, best guess would be the Republicans are going to win a margin of about 30 to 40 seats in the U.S. House. So they'll take control of the U.S. House side of Congress, which means Kevin McCarthy, that would be the Speaker of the House, and Nancy Pelosi would, my guess is she'll resign if Republicans actually win, that she's not going to become, I don't think she'd win the vote as minority leader, and I don't think she's just going to become some backbencher hanging out in Washington. So my guess is she'll resign and head back to San Francisco. One indicator of how things are going, when you look at turnout in contested races so far in the primaries, there have been several states where both parties have contested races. And the three that really have been interesting is in the Pennsylvania Senate race, Republicans had 140,000 more voters turn out than Democrats. In Ohio, there were 500,000 more Republicans turned out for the Senate and gubernatorial race than Democrats. And in North Carolina Senate race, about 150,000 more Republicans turned out than Democrats. So that just goes to the excitement factor. If those numbers continue, that creates some interesting dynamics in terms of who controls the US Senate come November. That one will be a much harder feat for Republicans just because of the races that are up. I think the most likely outcome is a 51-49 Republican control US Senate. Could be 50-50, in which case Vice President Harris would then again tie vote, keep the Democrats in control. Could go 42-48 Republicans, but it's going to be very tight whether it's Democrat control or Republican control thereafter. The key seats to watch, if you want to watch them, if you write this down, would be Nevada, where Cortez Masto, I think she's going to lose to Laxalt, who's going to be the Republican who gets nomination. Nevada has been, the numbers are looking very interesting there for Republicans this year. Again, there's this wave building, and she might go down in that wave. Arizona, I think Kelly will hold his seat. Wisconsin, Johnson, the Republican, I think will hold his seat there. Georgia, I think Warnock, who's a Democrat, will lose his seat to Herschel Walker. Most of you guys don't know who that is. He's a famous American football player for the University of Georgia Bulldogs. He won the Heisman Trophy, which is the best college football player in America. He then played professionally for the Dallas Cowboys. He's right now, the polling has him slightly ahead of Warnock in that race. It's going to be in Georgia. We'll see what happens, but I think he'll be able to pull that off. He's an African-American, but very interesting to see what kind of race that is, two African-Americans against each other in Georgia, with heavily African-American state, especially in that Atlanta area. North Carolina is an open seat. I think that'll be held by Bud, who's the Republican. New Hampshire is a Democrat held. Hassan, I think she'll win re-election. And then I think Pennsylvania might be the one that is the race. John Fetterman is the Democrat. He's kind of an unabashed, progressive AOC. That's Alexandria Cortez, Ocasio-Cortez, in case you don't know that, right? So he's running for the Democrats, and then we think it's going to be Mehmet Oz, who Trump endorsed in the primary. I think he is currently winning by like 900 votes. If he goes on to win, that race is like a massive toss-up. Nobody knows what's going to happen there. So much depends on what happens in the Philadelphia and Pittsburgh areas and the turnout there versus the rest of the state. So that'll be a very interesting race, but that's the one to watch on election night come November, because that may be the one that flips it to a 51-49 Republican-controlled Senate. So let me finish up, and then we can do whatever we're supposed to do next with what happens. I think they for sure win the House, the Republicans do. I think nobody believes that the Democrats are going to hold the House. The Senate becomes interesting. If the Republicans win the Senate and then have control of both chambers, it's going to be pretty ugly in the U.S. Republicans are livid about what the Democrats have done the last year and a half, 2 years. They're going to launch tons of investigations against Joe Biden, his family, Hunter Biden. They're going to remove certain members from all committees, Adam Schiff, Eric Swalwell, because they remove Republicans from committee. It's going to be this whole payback agenda that's going to happen. And so my guess is the Biden administration is going to be swamped with investigations, and that has only gotten ramped up as more information has come out about the Russia hoax against Trump, the Alpha Bank hoax against Trump, that really was just a Clinton campaign gambit that paralyzed his presidency for most of his presidency and created some foreign policy hurdles in terms of dealing with Russia that I think we're dealing with today. That also means any type of nominations that Biden puts forward are going to be stalled, especially Court of Appeals or any Supreme Court justices, if those happen to come up. That a justice will not be seated in the last 2 years if the Republicans control the Senate. There's just no way they're going to put somebody on, especially if it's a conservative who is being replaced for some type of tragic, or a death, and you may not see it tragic, but however it works. So there is a lot that could happen in the next 5 months, but all the trend lines are for a massive Republican wave election, like we saw in 2010 when the Tea Party kind of rose after Obama passed the Affordable Care Act by that one vote, rammed it through. That backlash is created. There's more and more of that happening. So there's just the foment is rising substantially. So we'll see if it maintains for 5 more months or peters out. But even if it does, history says it's not going to be a good year for Democrats. So really 2024 is where we're going to see the next fight. And remember, if Republicans take the House and or the Senate, everything they do is going to be geared toward winning the White House in 2024. So they want to harm Biden as much as possible, harm Harris as much as possible. So whoever they nominate is in a position to win in 2024, to kind of control everything and do what they want to do. Does that make sense? All right, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Matt. That was very insightful. We'll have a discussion in just a few minutes. But before that, I want to give the floor here to Bianca for her, well, let's call it rebuttal.
Thank you. I could react to a lot of stuff Matt has said, but I'll just keep it short. He's right in the fact that during midterm elections, mostly the party in power loses the House. So that will happen. There's the slightest chance it won't happen, but it probably will happen. I think, though, if the Democrats use the issues that are on the table right now well enough to organize their party better than they're doing right now, then they could have a little bit more success and they might keep the Senate. There's a lot going on in the US, right? So inflation, that will drive a lot of people to vote for the other party. So a downhill economy will make people vote for the other guy. But there's also women's rights that are under a lot of stress at this point. If the Democrats use that in a way to organize their party, organize women, and women are the people that go voting most. So if they do that in the right way, they can actually win a lot of votes, I think. Also, the gun problem. I think a lot of people in the US on the progressive sides are done with the gun laws as they are now. And even people in the Republican Party think that stuff has to change. So if they use that in a way to drive people to the polls more than ever, that could help the Democrats as well. So I think voter turnout is one of the most essential things for the Democrats. If they can bring it up, then they have a chance to at least keep the Senate. I think the House, that's a definite loss. It has never happened in the history that in a downhill economy, the people in power actually win. I think another thing that Matt said is that the demographics in the US is changing very rapidly, and that it also the vote is shifting a bit. So the Black vote and the Latino vote, but it's like very minor if it's at all. I couldn't find any statistics that prove it, because the Black vote is still in a majority for 90% for the Democrats. So especially on issues of women's rights and gun rights, if they use that well, I think they still have a chance. And also, I thought it was interesting to listen to Matt. I think in the US and US politics is all about your perspectives. I'm on a totally different side of politics in the US. I go there each year to help the Democrats campaign. So for me, it's all about perspective. So a lot of the issues that Matt talked about, for example, the fentanyl problem, that is a real problem. It has been a problem for over a decade now. I go to New Hampshire each year during the primaries, and I've seen the state go downhill because of this opioid problem. It's real, but it's there because deregulation. It's something that Republicans did in my eyes. So I think that's always very interesting with these two Americas you have. So without further ado, I think we should have a debate and answer all your questions, because I could rebuttal everything that Matt has said, but let's do it together with the whole room, I think.
In the middle? I'll sit here, that's easier for the... Well, thank you both. And we'll get to talk about a lot that was just mentioned about the midterms and also beyond the midterms and the current state of affairs. After that, there'll be plenty of time for questions from the audience. But I'd like to start with a word that neither one of you mentioned, a country that neither one of you mentioned, which is Ukraine, and the current war that we've gotten used to over the past 3 months, but it's still there and it's there to stay. Matt, the current debate in Washington, well, you live in Ohio, but you follow the debate in Washington about the war in Ukraine seems to be, some people are getting impatient, right? Republican senators voting against another package of another 40 billion going to Ukraine. What's the current thought about the war in Ukraine in Washington, and which party do you think it will help or harm President Biden and the Democrats?
I actually don't think it'll hurt or harm anybody. I think it actually will be increasingly irrelevant as we get to the midterm elections.
It's going to be about domestic issues, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, a growing number of Americans look at Ukraine and say, yeah, Europe's problem, not ours. Why are we spending $40 billion on Ukraine that there's no national security interest that the US can truly flesh out, right? We have a problem in China, but Ukraine is way far away, and if Russia takes it over, what does that do? Doesn't change the dynamic for us at all.
How could that not hurt the Democrats? Because Biden sending all this money and weapons.
Because I think right now there's enough bipartisan support for Ukraine where there is just a growing undercurrent that I think only becomes more relevant if Republicans take back the House.
Right.
And now you have Kevin McCarthy or Mitch McConnell that have to deal with people within their party, like a J.D. Vance who's running for the Senate in Ohio, who blatantly just says, who cares about Ukraine? We got a fentanyl problem, we got a border problem, people are dying here. right? But he's right now a loner voice in that space, but it'll grow as we get farther away from December and January that just passed, right?
But I mean, the Trumpian wing of the party, which has gotten pretty big. Some have said that basically the GOP has become the Trump party, and J.D. Vance in Ohio is definitely a Trump guy now. So that wing of the party is very much against sending, we're here to protect Pittsburgh, not Paris, was always don't look at Europe so much. So that wing has become more powerful, right? So my question again is, why would the debate that you're foreseeing not happen before the midterms?
Because I think, as Bianca said, Main Street America is focused on gas prices and grocery prices. And they're not real focused on Ukraine.
It almost never is an issue in American elections. Like in the debates, it will be an issue. Are you a good leader? Are you going to lead us internationally? That's about leadership, but actually not about the issues.
No, but usually a foreign policy crisis doesn't cost the American taxpayer as much money as this one is.
Well, so the contrast would be 9/11, right?
Right.
In that 202 midterm is one of the only times the president didn't lose seats. Gain seats in the midterm. And that's because it was an attack on the U.S. This one is just kind of like wait a minute, didn't we just get out of Afghanistan? Didn't we get out of Iraq?
Right.
Why would we go back? But since we haven't sent troops, we're just sending stuff and money. I think, and oh, by the way, the money is going to go to Ukraine or to defense contractors in the U.S. To supply Ukraine that all going to come back in the U.S. anyway. And so I don't see that rising very high among the issues that are on the kind of top of mind of American voters going in. I don't know if you disagree.
No, I think, especially since Trump made the death in the U.S. huger and huger in his 4 years, I think normally the Republicans were always about fiscal responsibility, and it would be an issue. So this would be a part of a discussion about fiscal responsibility. Are we not making too much debt? But because the Republicans inflated the debt enormously, one of the highest raises ever, I don't think they want to talk about that issue. So I think they're just going to talk about domestic issues. And it's also the domestic issues, especially, as you said, a downhill economy, which motivates its base. Sure. So we're going to talk about that mostly.
Final question on Ukraine, because you're quite critical of President Biden and the Democrats. How has he handled the war in Ukraine, you think? Because are you on the side of those Republicans who say he basically has been handling it pretty well?
I'm kind of he's on like a roller coaster, right? He's too often said something and then reversed himself, or done something or not done something. And so I think it's kind of like he's doing okay, right? There's no real hot or cold either way on it. In my view, I think it's just been like, okay, the way the 40 billion plays in is because it's so much money has gone out the door. I mean, really starting in 08, 09 to deal with that financial crisis. And then you had the spending that happened in response to the pandemic, which was enormous. And now it's just so much money has gone out the door. The Federal Reserve has just inflated the US dollar. And that's going to take a long time and a lot of pain to squeeze that inflation back out. And it's going to be ugly before it's better. So I think that's the only where it plays in. But 40 billion in the face of 32 trillion is a rounding error. Yeah.
And always in campaigns, if you talk about more than 1 million, people don't know what it means. So it just goes everywhere. It's blurry.
Yeah. Let's talk about the midterms. And Bianca, something you said, you were sounding, hopeful from your perspective that both...
She has to sound hopeful.
I know. That's all she has. No, I'm joking.
Hope and change. We're back to 08.
So you're saying that the gun problem and also Roe v. Wade, so the Supreme Court and the abortion issue may drive Democrats to the polls. At least that's your hope. But wouldn't both of those issues, and I guess particularly the Second Amendment, the gun rights, drive as many Republicans to the polls as well, who, especially when there's a Democrat in office, vote to protect their Second Amendment? So why do you think it's a winning issue for Democrats?
I think what we saw, like the last midterms, we saw the highest voter turnout in, I think, 4 decades or something. It was almost 50% instead of 40%, what it's normally. And that was also because a lot of people were angry. They were fed up with Trump. They were fed up with everything that was happening in the country. And it drove a lot of new voters to the voting booth. I think the issues that are on the line, like Roe versus Wade and the Second Amendment, will drive the base of the Republicans to the voters, to the voter booth. But for the Democrats, it's issues that can help organize new voters to the voting booth. A lot of young women, a lot of young Americans that are done with bringing their kids to school and having them checked on guns and stuff like that. So I think it will help them get new voters to the polls that usually stay at home during the midterms.
But hasn't history proven, sorry, I'm not texting or anything, I'm just looking at the clock because I don't see a clock here. I'm not texting. Hasn't history shown, though, that culture wars, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, it seems like Republicans want to fight culture wars, whether it's abortion or whether it's gender or whether it's guns or religion, because they're just better at it. It's more of a winning issue for Republicans, or am I wrong?
No. I mean, I don't know if they're better at it. I think they're right on the issue, right?
Well, both sides believe they're right on the issue.
No. Let me explain what I mean by that. Yeah. So you take the abortion issue, right? I mean, I've been doing this work for my entire career. Been in the trenches, right? I was shocked when I read a month ago that America, among democracies, is grossly out of line with the rest of the democratic world when it comes to abortion. We are far more lenient than most of Europe is. And the more people that learn that, I think it creates a growing problem for Democrats to sell states in America. Because remember, overturning Roe v. Wade won't ban abortion. It just means it gets pushed to the states for the democratic process, which is more democracy. And other than a handful of states that may do more extreme than current stuff in most European countries, it'll end up being around 10 to 15 weeks, heartbeat, brainwave activity kind of stuff, which I think 92% of all abortions occur within the first 7 weeks. So it won't affect most people. That's why I don't think it's going to be a driver for frankly, either party. The gun issue is another interesting one. So after the shooting in Texas last week, gun purchases skyrocketed. And it happens after every shooting because the Democrats always come out and start, in some of them, not most Democrats, but like a Beto O'Rourke, right? Starts talking about we're going to essentially outlaw or confiscate guns, or we're going to ban this, we're going to ban that. And so it sends...
But it never happens, and Beto always loses.
That's because Americans go, whoa, no, you're not. I mean, the problem with the gun issue is, and I say that in air quotes, is unlike a lot of other problems or issues, the Second Amendment is right there, and the constitutional law on that is fairly clear. Any attempt to try to ban something will likely get overturned as unconstitutional. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try to do like red flag laws. Those are common sense things that we should have out there for anybody.
And most Americans want that.
That's exactly right. I pushed that out 5 years ago, and when I was with the American Enterprise Institute, and said, we got it, like, this is just a common sense thing, right? Like, why would you be against that?
Right. Can you explain that? Sorry, you can finish your
Yeah, so,
point.
well, red flag law is if there's somebody who has had run-ins with the police or mental health issues, that, you have a system in place that allows when they, there are two different versions. A red flag says they can't buy the gun.
Yeah.
My version of red flag is they can buy the gun, but it immediately alerts local law enforcement to then go to a follow-up and talk to them. What's this about, right? And virtually every mass shooting that's happened in America, we find out after the fact that the number of people that intersected with the murderer had information that if they shared it with the cops, would have probably prevented it. Right. So that creates a problem. Now, the interesting thing is, so we get America wrapped up around the mass school shootings, right? Because there are kids involved. It's horrible. Every weekend in America, more kids and more people are killed in gun violence in the urban centers than happened in any school shooting. Right. And so
that's another reason to ban AR-15s. And
But it's not the
guns.
AR-15s that are doing it. It's the handguns in
Right,
those
but
situations.
ban those. I mean,
Well, you can't. The Second Amendment will not. That will
no,
never
but
happen.
you can make stricter rules. In many cases.
My guess is you will not get those through the courts.
Right.
But this gets back to, again, Trump won more of the minority vote than any Republican in modern history. And the reason for that, and I think what you're also seeing is the shifts that I've talked about, is because there are increasing numbers of Black Americans who are living in those urban centers. And what they hear from Black Lives Matter and Antifa and the defund the police is it's their communities that are paying the price for scaring the police, having fewer police out there, police then saying, hey, I don't want to be the next guy who gets prosecuted for what is deemed a wrongful death. So they stand back and the gun violence explodes. It's those communities that suffer the most, which is, I think, why there are increasing numbers. And again, it's not a lot, but it doesn't have to be a lot to change the voting dynamics for statewide or national elections.
Right.
Makes it hard for a Democrat to win if 5 to 7% more shift. And so the issues are very difficult to figure out how those are going to cut in this kind of election. I think if I were a Democrat running this year, I would try to localize my race as much as I possibly could. I would not want to have any national debate at all because I think I'll lose that.
You want to distance yourself from Biden.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. So I think...
And do you see that happening?
Yeah. He was in Ohio 2 weeks ago, and Tim Ryan, who's running for U.S. Senate, had a scheduling conflict that day. Wherever he goes, people don't...
He's become a little toxic.
Yeah, people don't show up. I think he totally understands that. I mean, I think most presidents get, if I'm a liability, I need to understand that. Right. But I would localize my race if I'm a Democrat, and I'd nationalize it if I'm a Republican.
Where are Republicans in general vulnerable? I mean, you sound very confident, I guess for good reason, that they'll take, well, definitely the House and perhaps the Senate. But what could happen that makes Republicans more vulnerable at the polls?
Donald Trump. I mean, suburban women don't like him. And
which may hurt the Republicans in 6 months and in the
absolutely at 5 months. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if Trump makes himself an issue, that hurts Republicans in those key districts where suburban women they don't like him and they don't want to hear from him. And so that's where there's a vulnerability if Trump's ego pushes him to be more vocal in October than he should be.
So if he should just keep quiet, basically.
Yeah, but he's not keeping quiet now. And he won't keep quiet in October and November because it's all about him looking forward to 2024 and preparing for the elections. And he is involved in a lot of races right now, boasting a lot about the fact that he's supporting all the right guys. But I think you're right. Women are very important in American elections. They're everywhere, very important in the Netherlands as well. Women go vote more than men. Men stay at home more. So if you motivate the women in the right way, and also, for the Republicans, they need the women in the suburbia. If they don't get them to the polls, there'll be a big problem, I think.
Now, the Democrats and the Biden team knows that Trump obviously is a vulnerability, and they want to tie Trump as much as they can to any GOP candidate, right? Which is why Biden has rebranded the GOP as the MAGA party, right?
Ultra MAGA party.
Ultra MAGA party. Make America great again. Is there any? Are there any signs that this is successful to brand them? To brand them with they're selling the big lie, the election lie that Trump won the elections. They're radicals, etc. Is it working with voters? You don't think so?
No, I don't think the Democrats tried it before, right? We just have to go talk about Trump and how bad he is, but they need to talk about their own issues and need to talk about the issues that will motivate their voters to go to the voting booth. I don't believe that dishing Trump helps anybody. And it prevents them to talk about their solutions for the economy, their solutions about women's rights. So they need to talk about their own issues, and they have made this mistake in the Democratic Party for a long time. In the Netherlands, you see the same thing, right? We're always talking about the other guy. Why are we talking about this mad guy that is in parliament? The PvdA needs to talk about their own issues. And I think it's hard because for a lot of Democrats, it's so crazy what is going on with these MAGA candidates, right? There's a couple of interesting people that are pro-Trump, and they want to talk about it because they're so surprised about it. But it's only putting attention towards those people and not about the issues and their solutions. And elections are about solutions and not about the problems.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. And it's also not working because, so apparently Biden came up with that tag on his own and then threw it out there.
The Ultra MAGA Party.
The Ultra MAGA Party, yeah. And Republicans immediately embraced it and said, yeah, we're all about America first. He's about America last. And then they went, because here's the border, here's inflation, here's
It's a pretty dumb slogan.
Right, but he thought he was being clever, and it's one of those things where it's like, okay, that's not quite gonna, because it's divorced from the pulse of America right now, right? They're very concerned about America first,
right?
Because of all these policy failures at this point. And so to kind of stress a party being more America, I don't see how that sells.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, with everything that happened from the tragedy in Afghanistan to the war in Ukraine and inflation and the price at the pumps and everything, you could argue that Biden's approval ratings right now, I mean, usually a new president, they start at 50-something, going towards 60, and then 1 year or year and a half into the presidency, it's about 40%, right? Which is where Biden is, 40% approval, which is a little lower than Trump is, as your chart said, but not much. I mean, it could be worse, right?
Okay, so let's put that in perspective, because it's a good point. And I think to your point, America is so hyper-polarized and has been for probably, let's call it 20 years now, where I don't care what Republican it is and what Democrat it is, you're going to be in the mid 40s in most situations, unless something happens that spikes you up, right? Yeah. Because the other party that will not support you.
And you'll never go back to 60.
There's no working across the aisle anymore.
No, there really isn't. Now, the problem though for Biden is, and this is how you have to look at it between Trump and Biden, those numbers that were on those charts. Trump got 90% negative news from the moment he came down the escalator at Trump Tower in 2015 of July to today. Like virtually everything about him is negative that's written by the media.
I've always find that, not to sound too defensive because I'm a member of the media, but such an odd way to put percentages on negative news, because he earned some of the negative. I mean, these are not all opinion pieces. Right. These are pieces about a guy saying that the Charlottesville marches were okay.
Which he didn't say that.
I knew exactly what he said, but
the quote is actually not that.
Yeah, no, it's even worse.
No, it's not. If you look at the actual quote, the full quote he gave that day, it's
great guys
not.
On both sides.
And then he specifically said, I condemn the white supremacist and the racist. Yeah. He actually said that.
He said several things.
Right, but right there. But anyway, I don't want to debate. Okay, so the point is though, Obama had 80% positive news coverage from the media for his entire 8 years. So the reason I give you those numbers is because that Trump at 40% disapproval is driven by never getting hardly any positive news, right? So Biden to be at that same number, given what is typically a fawning left-leaning media, is problematic. I would argue it's not the same 40%. I know that sounds kind of stupid because it's 40%. Yeah. But him getting that low is going to be a bad sign. Yeah, I mean, given how much people want to help him, that's a bad sign. Right? I mean, Trump was never very high. That's why I use that chart shows that he was never, it was like it was like this pretty much the whole time, which was always around 40%.
Low expectations.
Yeah, but also because there was so much negative coverage that, I mean, he virtually could do nothing right if you read a newspaper or watched it.
But it's also depending, because that's what you said. The U.S. is the most polarized country I know, I think. And it depends on which news you watch as well. Because if I put on Fox News, which I do now and then, just to know how that side is talking about the country and the state of the country, then you get a whole lot of perspective, because there Trump gets like good ratings. He's a good international leader. And I'm thinking, well, good international leader. We're kind of afraid of him getting president ever again, because we didn't like him in power. But it's just, so it's so polarized that even the media is polarized. And just which channel you watch at night,
Right.
which news you watch will decide how you think the country is going. And you can see it in polling data as well. They always ask which news network do you watch. If it's CNN, they're more positive about the state of the country than if they watch Fox.
Yeah, if you're a Democrat, you watch MSNBC or CNN. If you're a Republican, you watch Fox News.
The thing is that Fox News has, especially on prime time, which is the most influential part of, the Sean Hannitys, and they have a bigger viewership than MSNBC and CNN combined.
Tucker is getting huge numbers these
days.
So
and that was both during the Trump and the Biden administration. So when you say that the media are on the side of, more people digest the Fox News media diet than the New York Times, CNN media diet.
If you're looking at whether 2.3 million people watched Fox News versus 1 million,
right?
That's 330 million people in America.
No, I know, but there are many more conservative. If you look at Facebook, 8 of the 10 most shared news articles are always conservative.
But I think when you put together,
big,
NPR and CNN and MSNBC, the New York Times, Washington Post, every other newspaper in America virtually. Right. You're talking about against Fox News opinion people, Tucker, Sean, but not Brett Baer.
And Facebook.
But Facebook has so censored the right with their algorithm stuff.
8 of the 10 most shared articles are from the right.
Yeah, but that's very few of them. They've censored so much of what gets distributed now, right? And Twitter is heavily dominated by the liberals, right? So it's everybody's getting their source from their own side, right? But I don't think anybody credibly would suggest that Republicans get a fair shake in the broad scan of non-opinionated media. Maybe they do, but I don't think they'd be taken seriously.
Okay. What can the Democrats do, Bianca, you think, to turn this around before the midterms? I guess that's not possible, but to keep the damage from becoming, to keep the Senate, for instance. The House, you both agree, that's a done deal, right?
Yeah, historically,
he can't
it's never
change the
happened.
gas prices by himself.
No, and the economy, like everywhere in the world, after the pandemic, the economies are going down everywhere. It's an international problem. It's not certainly just a U.S. problem. Growth is just slowing everywhere. So he can't change the economy. He can't do anything about that. I think they really need to look forward and not just focus on this midterm, but also 2024 and talk about what is going to be the story they're going to talk about the next couple of years, what is going to be the candidates they're going to put forward. Because as Matt said, the problem is that people don't really have trust in the future of the party as well. So there's a lot of discussion in the party. There's a lot of talk about, do we need to go more progressive or not? And they need to find an answer. Right. What is the central story we're going to talk about the next coming 3-4 years, and put faces to that as well. So people want to know who is going to be your candidate. Is it going to be Biden? Well, he's pretty old, and if in a couple more years, I don't even know if he can walk.
He'll be 81.
Because I think they really need to have an internal discussion. There is a lot going on. There's a lot of movement, but they haven't made a choice yet. Right. So people don't know what to expect from the party, and they need to find an answer to that, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And let me surprise you, I guess, maybe. I actually think there is a growing likelihood Trump will not run in 2024, despite everything that you're hearing that he will. And here's why. I think 2024 will be a contrast election in America. And I think the contrast is going to be age. Joe Biden is not aging well at all. 2 more years and a half years of this is going to be bad. He'll be 81 years old. I think that there will be a growing segment of the Republican Party in a primary that says, do we want to replace their 81-year-old guy with our 78-year-old guy, even though Trump seems to have a constitution that's ungodly powerful. Right. I don't know how, but he gets 4 hours of sleep and he's more alert than I am usually. But I think that more Republicans are going to be thinking about, hey, maybe this should be like a younger, more vibrant, somebody who isn't close to 80. I could be wrong, but I think that's why I think in that last chart you have Ron DeSantis is getting the numbers he's getting. Right. He is doing an amazing job if you are a conservative in Florida. He's turning Florida from a battleground state into a redder and redder state. Right. Even after New Jersey and New York is fleeing in droves to Florida, they're registering as Republicans. He's erased the Democrat advantage that historically has been in Florida in terms of registration numbers. He's walking to re-election as governor when, if you might recall, he barely won his first race in 18.
Helped by Trump. I mean, Trump probably pushed him with his endorsement over the line, right?
Yeah, for sure. And so I think it's more and more likely that you will see like Ron DeSantis, Tim Scott, who is a senator from South Carolina, African-American, really loved in the Republican Party, or Ron DeSantis and a Kristi Noem, who's the governor of South Dakota. I think it would be impossible for the Republicans to put two white men as the nominees for 2024, just because I think they would look grossly out of step when they have such a deep bench of women and minorities who could easily be vice president or president material.
It seems like, if you don't mind me interrupting, it seems like the Republican, and that I think that's been the same. That's been the case ever since Obama was there, who never really took care of, talents within his party. The Republicans have a much larger bench of viable candidates, even including Pence or Pompeo, than the Democrats have, right? And isn't the problem also that as long as Biden says or leaves open the idea that he may run again, which if he doesn't say so,
he freezes anybody else. Yeah.
So he freezes everybody else, and I guess it's Kamala Harris' turn if she wants the candidacy, but she, her polling is really bad.
There's just no way she becomes the nominee for the Democrats.
But isn't it basically tradition? If Biden steps aside, isn't the nomination basically hers if she wants it?
Traditionally,
I know not factually, but
no. Traditionally, that is the case, but her approval ratings are lower than Biden's.
Right.
It is like every time she's pushed out in the forefront, she makes a huge mistake. Her staff is hollowed out. She's lost so many of her staffers because she's difficult to work for.
No, you're right. But even running against her would make the Democrats look panicky.
It would definitely. And you got to keep in mind,
how they arrange it, right? If they start talking about the issues already right now, like, okay, what are we going to do? Not this election, but the next couple of years. What is going to be the future of our party? You see a lot of enthusiastic young people around AOC, but a lot of like the really progressive ones. Is that the choice we're going to make? Are we going to be the progressive party? And a lot of people that are in powerful positions now in the Democratic Party are very scared about making that choice. Whilst you saw the enthusiastic young people that you need during elections are there.
Right.
So they really need to talk about that. And I think if they make the choice on time, they could shift the whole thing and just, make sure that Kamala gets a nice job somewhere and be very nice and gentle to Biden. But yeah, I think they really need to talk about this in a public way. Like, what is because people are already talking about it and doubting and not going to the voting booths if they're not, and if they don't know where their vote is going towards in the future.
Yeah, and remember, she dropped out
before Iowa.
Right.
Yeah.
That's how badly she. And so
and she's from California, where there are lots of money.
There's a lot of money, but there's also the Albert Einstein's famous definition of insanity, right? You do the same thing and expect a different result. It is clear she is just not up to snuff for kind of the presidential seat, right? And there are other folks in the Democratic Party that may be interesting and appealing to a broad swath of voters.
But most of them are older, like Sanders.
Well, but you got
Warren.
Pete Buttigieg, you got Cory Booker out of New Jersey, Gavin Newsom out in California. Right. Like, there are some folks. Yeah. I don't know if Andrew Cuomo is dead yet. I mean,
probably.
He may try to run. He's pretty mad, but there are some folks out there that could run and be in a far better position than either Biden in 81 or Kamala Harris in the position she's now in.
Right.
And there's a lot of women joining the ranks as well, and I think the Democrats especially have to look towards women as candidates, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. Now, before we go to, let me look at the time, to audience questions as well. Both parties obviously are split, right? I mean, you could argue that there's a civil war within the Democratic Party between the traditional Clinton-Biden, moderates and the AOC
progressive,
the squad and the woke wing of the party, and obviously you see the same with the Republicans, the Romney wing and the Trumpian wing. In which party is the risk of a more permanent split more likely to happen?
I'm not sure there's a split. Right now the Trump policy wing is dominant. The Wall Street Journal today had an article from Asa Hutchinson, who's the outgoing governor of Arkansas, who's going to start making the presidential visits to New Hampshire and Iowa. There are others that think they want to kind of bring the Republican Party back to its establishment kind of position.
Kind of Liz Cheney, right?
What's that?
Liz Cheney.
Liz Cheney, who's going to get killed in Wyoming. Right. I don't see the Republican Party ever going back to that framework. I think if you take Trump's personality away from the equation and you just think about the policies, the policies are fairly popular.
You mean the Trump policies?
Yeah. Right. So if
what is it? Is it like
the personality comes into play, that's the problem, right? But secure the border, right? Putting America first over China, over Europe, protecting jobs, bringing manufacturing, like all that. That's why
even Biden took over some of these.
Absolutely.
Ideas.
That's why blue-collar Democrat union voters fled the Democratic Party in 2016 and stayed with Trump because they saw that. Yeah. I think the danger that the Democrats have is that shrinking group of moderate voters who don't want to subscribe to the AOC, that progressive squad agenda. That may drive them just out, right where they leave, and then AOC's that progressive wing's in control. I think they will win that battle. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think the progressives are going to win that battle. And I think the Trump policies are going to win that battle. So then it becomes a
more extremes,
more
right?
Polarizing. Yeah, and that gets into this redistricting, right? As over the course of years, as more and more congressional districts were drawn to be really, really red and really, really blue, and there were fewer purple or light blue and light red seats, it pulled both parties towards their wings, and that's not changing.
But if that's sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that's one of the biggest problems in the US, because what you see happening is that it's getting more and more extreme. At the same time, half of the time, nothing happens in DC, like really nothing happens. The people in the US are losing their trust each day more and more in government. It's like the lowest has ever been. It was like in the 80s when Kennedy was there. It's now like 17%.
That's Reagan in the 80s.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, in the 60s. It was 80% in the 60s. Now it's 17% of people that still kind of trust the national government. Well, if you have that low of a trust, it's because nothing is happening. Nothing is helping changing the lives of the people that it's all about. So
I'm a little surprised that you say that the woke wing of the party will win that intra-party battle, because Biden has won the elections, not Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, but Biden has adopted a lot of Bernie Sanders. Right. That's why he's having the problems he's having, right? Because he's adopting all of these more progressive policies instead of being the moderate he is, uniting as he said he would. That's what's causing some problems. So I don't see the hyper-partisan ending. And it didn't start with Trump. I mean, Brahm and I talked about this earlier today. I think it started with Robert Bork back in 1987 when Ted Kennedy and Joe Biden, ironically, went after Robert Bork.
Who was a nominee
for the Supreme Court under Reagan. And I think that's really started the personalization component. And then so now we're going to get them back. So we went after Bill Clinton, and now we're going to go to back. And now, so it just, and that as we've ratcheted it up, we keep making it bigger and bigger I don't know how we can ratchet back down. But you're also talking to someone who, I'm okay if Washington doesn't get much done, because I don't believe Washington is where things should get done. I'm a federalist. Right. I believe the states are where we should get things done, that the laboratories of competition where 50 states can try to solve the problems, and then by looking what succeeded elsewhere, we rise as a country because we can figure out what works and doesn't rather than a one-size-fits-all solution. So I'm a big proponent of Democrat governors, Republican governors, Democrat state legislatures. Right. I'll take a Democrat governor and state legislature over Washington any day.
Right.
And there's a growing number of Americans that feel that way,
Right.
right? Because that gets back to the whole de Tocqueville, and the closer we can push democracy to the people, the better. And that's why I think I don't know if you guys have followed all these school board, which are, the little local school things
Right.
in America where the lids are coming off on teaching woke policies, right? Critical race theory or transgenderism, all this stuff. It's
Banning books.
it's causing this massive amount of kickback where in heavily Democrat cities, Republicans are sweeping school board elections because parents are so frustrated with what's being taught. That local control piece really is where so much action is happening right now in America.
Right. Final question to both of you, and let's pretend you're a member of the Democratic Party, which you're not, but you'll take that position. Are you worried about the extreme wing, let's say, of the Democratic Party, the wokeism? Is it going too far? May it hurt the Democrats? And I guess the same question for you on the big lie wing of the Republican Party. But let's start with you.
I think if the Democrats push it too far, it's going to be hard to ever win a national election. I think on local levels they'll win on the blue sides of the country. So on both coasts they will win. It's not a problem. But to ever win a national election, you don't need to push it too far.
Right.
But I think that, and you also see it in polling on issues. A lot of people in the U.S. are way more progressive than their votes. So they really need to look at this data and see what people are worried about. And they are open for a lot of more progressive issues. So you can be a progressive party, but there is a thin line.
Need repackaging.
Yeah, repackaging, definitely. They need a new message because there is no clear message from the Democrats at this point. And I think the Republicans have a more clear message that is more united and looks more like one front. And I think, the Democrats have a big problem in it's so diverse what they want to talk about. And there's so many issues that they want to tackle. You can't tackle all those issues. It needs to start somewhere. And they need to find a starting point.
Are you sometimes worried about the conspiracy wing of the Republican Party, if I may say so?
No, I mean, no more than I'm worried about the conspiracy on the Democratic Party, right?
Some say that wing is undermining democracy, right? By the Capitol storming or, agreeing.
And this is where
I'm
you
not
get
saying
into.
you are, but
No. This is where you get into POV, right? Points of view. I think the Clinton campaign's Russia hoax and Alpha Bank hoax did more to undermine democracy than anything that's happened on the right in the last 5 years. My opinion, right?
Sure.
But what worries me is a return to the establishment for the Republican Party, because that I think will depress turnout among Republicans. So let me give you the best example I can give you. In Ohio, my governor's up for re-election. He's a Republican. Republicans don't really like him. He won a primary.
That's Dewine, right?
That's Mike Dewine.
Right.
He won a primary against grossly underfunded opponents by, he won at 47%, which is a horrible number. If you're an incumbent Republican, he's worth about $100 million. So he had way more money than anybody else that ran against him. And he didn't even get over 50%. In polling that came out, I think yesterday, against the Democrat, Nan Whaley, who's the former mayor of Dayton, he's at 45%. So again, for an incumbent Republican, you need to be above 50% and should be in a state that Trump won by 8% twice, right? So my concern is people like Mike Dewine depressing turnout that could hurt J.D. Vance in the Senate race if Republicans don't show up because of Mike Dewine versus show up for J.D. Vance. So that's the piece that worries me more than anything is Republican politicians not realizing the party is no longer that Chamber of Commerce party. It's a working man and woman's party at this point because of Trump's movement.
Yeah. And that worries you more than Republicans who keep repeating Trump's lie and who may be willing to storm another Capitol for it.
I don't think that's going to happen again. I don't think that'll happen again. Right. But
echoing the lie doesn't worry you? Or?
No, because there's enough data out there that whether it's Mark Zuckerberg's $500 million to take over local election groups, whether it's the 2,000 Mules thing that's now out there.
But let's go back to. I mean, do you believe Biden fairly won the election?
I believe Biden won the vote total that day. do I believe that there were things done in the run-up to the election that made it really difficult for Trump to win? I do. If the $500 million in Zuck bucks didn't go into those key states, do I think Trump would have won 43,000 more votes in the 3 states?
Possibly.
I think he might have, right? If we would have found out about the Russia hoax and the Alpha Bank hoax far sooner, right, and knew that was all a lie, it was all a Clinton campaign thing, would he have probably won? Probably, right? Despite COVID and all his press conferences on COVID. Right. So I think that is where, to me, the election was lost. But look, people like me, I'm always hitting people like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Loren Bobbitt out of Colorado, because I think they
harm the brand.
I think they harm us because they make the right look like idiots.
Right.
And the media does a great job of making sure that they give Marjorie Taylor Greene as much time as they want.
Sure.
They don't do the same with the morons on the left who do stupid stuff too. But that's, so we deal with that. No big deal. We try to marginalize people like her because she just makes us look goofy, and we're like, okay, great.
Right.
But yeah, it's just a battle we have to fight. But no, I'm more worried about a suppression, internal, not
turnout. Right.
Turnout. I shouldn't say suppress. Turnout because of the lack of interest, enthusiasm, because we're going squishy moderate rather than staying true to that kind of America First message.
Right. Great. Thank you. Are there questions from the audience? I'm sure there are. And otherwise, I'll just point at somebody. There you go. Go ahead. I think there's an audience mic, or you can just, yeah.
Hi. I have a question about Dewine. I believe Biden was Wait a second, please.
Oh, it's turning you on. Yeah.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah. So it's on.
That's loud. Just whisper.
I believe it was Biden who, in 2020, we talked a lot about bridging the gap between the two parties, bipartisan cooperation. Should they also talk about that more during this election? Is that in their advantage to talk about it for either party? Are a lot of Americans who are interested in bipartisan cooperation in bridging the gap?
I think people in the parties are interested in it. And if they talk about it in the right way, so trying to explain that bridging this divide needs to happen to do anything in this country, because what I said, nothing is happening, and as soon as the other party comes in, they will overturn the stuff that the previous party did. So in the end, Americans are not helped by this politics. But is it an interesting issue during elections? No, I won't think so.
Biden has basically, I mean, if he speaks about the ultra MAGA party, he has basically given up about building bridges, right?
He tried for a bit, but gave up pretty soon. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's made other derogatory remarks about Trump voters, which it's a lot of voters. 70 million. Right. A lot of those folks on Main Street. So yeah, I don't think bipartisanship is going to sell to win an election. The bases won't like that on either side, because there's the base voters for Democrats don't want a super light version of the Green New Deal, right? And Republican base voters don't want anything to do with any Green New Deal. So it's just not something that's going to sell for an election at all. I think it's just going to be get your base fired up and try to get as many out to vote as you possibly can, and see where the dust settles that day.
Right. Thank you. Other questions?
Okay.
Over here? Yeah.
You all mentioned the growing polarization in the US, and especially during, like you mentioned, the last 20 years. Do you have any development in the future that could be a solution that people from different states could look each other in the eyes again? Because it's been, so much polarization about this.
No, in the near term, and let me explain what I mean by that. I think for there to be a change, one of two things is going to have to happen. One's brute force, meaning one party runs on an agenda and wins 60 votes in the Senate, majority House in the presidency, and says this is a mandate, this is where America is, and goes, and that becomes increasingly popular. That isn't 2022 or 2024, might not be until 2028. Other than that, I think the single most likely event to bring the country together is an external threat from China. Maybe North Korea, but mostly China. I think more and more Americans across the spectrum see China is an enormous threat that we're not dealing with in the right way, whether it is on the economy issues, IP theft, trade, or it's their growing ambitions in the South China Sea and beyond.
But both parties basically already agree on China, right?
For the most part, I think that's right. I think because this is where, whether you like him or not, Trump really was in the vanguard
Definitely.
on China, in being aggressive on China. And so a lot of folks have now, on both parties are now there. But something's going to have to precipitate that. And I don't particularly want that to occur because I think that means we're at war. But that, I think, is about the only thing short of one party truly kind of winning big that will bring the country together. I mean, you see any issue happen, and within hours, it is polarized. Right. It is. What's the political gain we can get out of pointing to the other side on this? I mean, it's instantaneous now, in a way that, like you take the leak of the Supreme Court draft opinion. That was unprecedented. It's never happened before. That's a terrible thing to have occurred in the breach of trust that's occurred in the Supreme Court. But immediately, right, you saw both parties' positions. Republicans, get the leak or this is terrible. Democrats, they're going to take away your right to abortion. Like it immediately just became
everything is politicized.
Yeah, it became immediately politicized, right? Oh, that had to be a Sotomayor clerk. Everybody knows it's one of her clerks. She's a hack. She shouldn't even be on the court. Oh, right. This is all about taking away the woman's right to choose. This is what it's all about. They've been after this for 40 years. They're going to get it. It just, I mean, within hours, right. It was that was it. The issue was framed, and we moved on. Right.
I think one of the biggest problems is that the United States hasn't done anything to maintain their democracy in a proper way. So the system has been developed in a period that was not comparable to nowadays. And they still have a system where it's winner takes all, where there's way too much money involved, which corrupts a whole lot of stuff. Each time that somebody is elected on day one, they have to start raising money again to enter the elections again. And especially people in the House, they only have 2 years because they have to get reelected every 2 years. And there's so much money involved. I think as long as the system doesn't change, the political system, where there's more, more representative politics, this divide won't get less. And it's hard because then one party has to really win the majority to change something.
Yeah, and look, if we were a multi-party system like you guys have here, we'd have the same moderation of policy by virtue of that, right? But we don't. It's two parties. I don't care what whatever Green Party Ralph Nader can try to spin, or whatever Libertarian Party that it's not. It is, you either vote this team or that team, and that's the way it goes.
Be careful what you wish for. We have 20 parties.
I know.
In Parliament.
Including Animal Party. I know.
But I think
well, not just that one.
I know.
Yeah, but it's a problem that the system in the US is getting less and less democratic because, for example, the Senate, 50% of the Senate only represents 40 million less than the other 50%. So it's like a big divide. There's like all the states get 2 senators, but there's nobody living there, and there's a lot of divide because of that, which is not necessary in a way, I think. So,
but remember, that's structurally intentional, right? The right. purpose of the U.S. Senate was not to represent people; it was represent interests of the states.
Yeah, but it's changed.
I understand.
Right?
In 1917, we changed it with the 17th Amendment, but that made it that didn't make it better. That made it worse, and it doesn't then justify somehow getting rid of the Senate and the functionality of the Senate. It means, frankly, returning it back to having senators represent their states, not the voters in their states, because that's what the House is about. That's why the Senate was supposed to be, has always been more patient, slower, because the state, separating it from the people, made it so. Now it's popular vote rather than state legislatures, which is how it was voted for most of U.S. history. That's the problem you have to now try to fix, right? And I'm not sure how to fix that, but you know. Look, I'm fascinated by the European politics. Like, as Bram knows, I follow, Netherlands politics real close, and all the various parties. And I've met with members of parliament ranging from, VVD all the way to, Thierry Baudet and his thing right before he went totally off the end. But to me, it's interesting because more choice isn't a bad thing, but it's also hard to get stuff done here too.
Consensus.
Right? So that's difficult. So I'm not sure anybody's doing it really well. And you guys have lots of hot button issues here too.
Sure.
So I think nationalism has kind of risen all over the place. And that may not be a bad thing. I think that's more of Main Street, Harlem is frustrated as Main Street, Ohio. And the political process here and there isn't solving what's bothering them. So I think we have a larger democracy problem than just a mess in the United States, right? I think it's the West is struggling with this issue writ large, and how do you have a system that works for a broader piece of the pie?
Right. I think we have time for one or two more questions. I think, gentleman in the back, yeah. Oh, okay, great. Okay, wonderful, thank you.
I think it's now come, regarding this discussion about polarization, that we discuss some issues which is most interesting for most of the audience. Do you dare to express your thoughts on two things? The elephant in the room is the re-election of Donald Trump regarding this midterm elections. That's why we're here for. And I see from that the chances are rather high. What does it mean for transatlantic relations in general in future? And what is not mentioned by you, what is the role of the armed forces in the United States regarding this polarization? Do you think they are really faithful to any Trump administration or to any Democratic administration, or are the armed forces also split up? And I think that they are a real danger, also for Europe, also for the transatlantic relations in general. Could you comment on that, please?
Okay, that's a lot. I'll do my best. Okay, so I've got a op-ed that I've written that hasn't come out yet, which is called the Not This Timer movement. And the whole thrust of it is, I own a first edition copy of Art of the Deal by Donald Trump that I bought in 1987 as a 16-year-old. Wow. My ATM code was his initials when I was a teenager. I voted for him 4 times. I support the policies. I get tired of defending the personality. So I'm largely a fan of what happened under Trump from a policy standpoint. But boy, I'd sure like Ron DeSantis instead. If, however, Trump runs again and wins the Republican nomination, I have no qualms supporting him in the general election. And I don't think he'd be particularly problematic if he becomes president again in terms of what most folks worry about. The Transatlantic Alliance, whether Trump wins or not, I think more and more Americans, I think, are confused by Europe and NATO. They don't quite understand why Americans bear such a heavy burden. They understand why we did in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s. I think 30 years later, I just think they look at it and say, why are we paying to defend Europe and why don't they meet some of the obligations? And you guys aren't one of the problem, right? But why do we have to pay for this if the Germans aren't? And the Germans are just as wealthy or wealthier than we are when you look at the numbers, right? And so that's where, again, Trump resonated, right? Because people are like, yeah, I don't get it. So let me get this right. We are paying to defend Europe from Russia while Germany is cutting pipeline deals on Nord Stream 2 to make itself more dependent upon Russia.
Doesn't make sense.
That just doesn't make sense. Right. And that's so there's that confusion, right? That said, I think most Americans love Europe. We love coming here on vacation. My kid's down in Germany on study abroad for the second time in Europe. I'm back here in another month and a half with my daughter to vacation. I mean, we love Europe. There's lots of tradition between the Transatlantic Alliance, but I think it has to be updated. I don't think it makes sense. It feels like a Cold War relationship that doesn't quite fit in 2022. And where I think the answer might lie is a unified transatlantic alliance vis-a-vis China. And I don't know if we can get there because right now I think Germany wants to use arbitrage against the US with China, and that's going to create some growing tension, I think, within the transatlantic alliance. But that's kind of where I see it. And I think your last question was the military. The military should be strenuously apolitical. It has gotten too political in various points in time, and it needs to kind of de-escalate from that position and get back to focusing on preparing for and winning wars, which over the last few decades we've not been very good at. And so to me, I'm not worried that either a Democrat or Republican president can kind of do something crazy and the military will follow. It just won't happen. So I just think the more the military gets back to being, and remember, as the military has gotten political, the trust in the military has plummeted like these other institutions that have gotten overtly political. So we got to get that back up, right? Because we don't want faith in the military to be at a low point if, God forbid, something needs to happen with China.
Thank you. Final question, since we're talking about Trump possibly winning the 2024 election, most Republicans I talk to are, I guess, on your side. Let's take somebody like DeSantis, who is a more disciplined version of Trump, but you'll get the same policies, right? Yeah. But if Trump does get the nomination, Biden won 7 million more votes than Trump, and this was before the January 6th uprising at the Capitol, which turned away many Republicans as well. I mean, apart from Biden's age, but a generic Democrat, how could Trump be the Democrat? I know we underestimated him before, but he got 7 million less votes than an old guy like Biden.
So Biden won. Biden winning was not Trump, right? And so exactly. But I got to remind you, right? We're not a popular vote country. So Democrats will always win more votes than Republicans' popular vote because of California, New York, Illinois, New Jersey, and Massachusetts combined, right? There's just so many more voters, and they win by such huge margins there. Joe Biden won by 43,000 votes in 3 states, which was a smaller margin than Trump beat Hillary, which was 73,000 votes in 3 states. Right. So the issue is, if you look at that approval number on that first page of Trump, where it went even lower after the January 6th riots, it's now back up to where it typically is. And now I think after a year and a half of putting meat on the bones of who is Joe Biden, Trump is looking a bit better than he would have been or was a year and a half ago, when Joe Biden was going to unite us and it was going to be this moderate kind of the adult in the room. Right. That's not working right. And so my sense is it will be a close election if it's Trump. Right. It will be a less close election if it's somebody other than Trump.
Like DeSantis.
Like DeSantis. I think DeSantis could win a very strong, sorry, I need to define very strong. Very strong in America, Electoral College is like 330.
Yeah.
Right, Barack Obama was 330. Like that's just, there are too many states that are either, yes, they're blue, yes, they're red, and we squeeze around 10 states that are the battlegrounds that are really up for grab that can go either way. So but I think DeSantis would win those states far better than Trump will. I think there's the people like me who are like, oh, I don't want to spend 4 more years having to defend every tweet or utterance. Can we just have somebody more disciplined that has the same policy approach? And I like governors. I think governors are executives who have proven they either can do something or not, right? So, yeah, my hope is, and I think it will be the case that Trump will hopefully realize he can be more effective as the elder statesman in the Republican Party,
the cheerleader,
than as the candidate. But he's Trump, and his ego is bigger.
I guess
than
we'll
this
know
room.
Later this year after the midterms, right? That's when people should
Well,
to.
Well, we won't know. I mean, so this is what happens, right? And this is the same with Joe Biden, and I think you mentioned this, is they're both going to freeze everybody else for as long as they can. I mean, the moment Trump says, I'm not running, his relevancy goes like this a bit. So he's going to be like, yeah, you're going to like my decision. And he's going to do that as long as possible, and so will Biden, and that will hurt the
Both
other people.
parties.
Although I think it doesn't hurt Ron DeSantis because there's already such a growing movement for him.
And he's young. He can try in 28.
Yeah, but I think, if Trump then at the last minute says, oh, I'm not going to, I think instantly he becomes kind of a 50, 60% supported candidate.
And it also depends on how the economy recovers.
So that's the big question. I mean, most expectations is we're going to go into some kind of recession in the next year and a half. How deep?
We don't know.
How severe? What happens with this, Ukraine, Russia? What happens with China and Taiwan? I mean, there's so much unknown.
And depends on what the pandemic. So it's you can now kind of talk about, Trump going to win? Are the Democrats going to win? But it's so hard because elections are never in a vacuum. There's always a lot going on. So that's why you can talk about DeSantis versus Trump, but you never know until the two candidates are there and you know what the context is.
Right, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
The only thing we do know for sure is that we're done with this discussion now, and I think the bar is open. I think Bram said that. I want to thank everybody for coming, and most particularly Bianca, Pander, and Matt Meyer. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, man.
That was great. Thank you.